Star Wars, best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, a UK-based Star Wars podcast with in-depth discussions and analysis sprinkled with some silliness. I am the Geordie Jedi Pete.
I'm Jason Hondo Ling.
And I'm Kat Ruth-Yalker.
And we are back with our final Andor Season 2 review. Today we will be deep dive reviewing episodes 10, 11 and 12. It is the final arc of Andor Season 2 and the final arc of Andor as a whole, as this does take us up to Rogue One. These episodes were released on May the 13th, 2025. All three written by Tom Bissell and all three directed by Alonso Ruiz Palacios. I hope I've announced that correctly. And yeah, Andor has come to an end. It was absolutely epic. It was absolutely tragic. We're going to break it down episode by episode. I think obviously me and Jason on the last episode have just reviewed the previous arc. Kat, I know you weren't available for that one. I suppose just what was your thoughts, Kat, going into the final arc? And sort of what we expected and did it deliver?
Well, going into this final arc, I knew the stakes were going to be at the highest they've ever been for our group of heroes. But I think what I wasn't expecting was the sheer ruthlessness and desperation of the Empire. Although there's some suggestion of that within the previous arc that just aired, of certainly how the Empire are willing to do anything, this final arc really solidified just how far the Empire are willing to go to try and protect the secrecy around the Death Star, as well as to try and maintain their rule, which I think they're starting to realize it's crumbling around them.
Yes, there certainly are. There's certainly a mad scramble where desperation is leading to all kinds of tragedy and disaster on the table. So episode 10 is the first episode of this arc. It is titled Make It Stop. A year following the events on Gorman, Lonnie gains access to Deidre's personal files and discovers a secret project the Empire has been working on. He gives this information to Luthen, warning that Deidre has likely uncovered both their identities. Though he initially promises Lonnie and his family safe passage from Coruscant, Luthen kills him to ensure his silence, then hurriedly briefs Claire. As Luthen destroys the comm system in the shop, Deidre arrives and confronts him. Luthen attempts suicide and is taken, gravely injured, to a hospital as Claire watches from afar. Deidre is arrested by the ISB for withholding information. Interspersed throughout the episode, flashbacks reveal that Luthen was an Imperial officer who defected after his unit massacred Claire's hometown. Finding her hiding in his ship, he informally adopts her, and the two begin selling antiques while waging resistance against the Empire. In the present, Claire sneaks into the hospital and shuts off Luthen's life support system. I think let's just talk about Lonnie. I think in season 1, Lonnie came across as maybe a bit of like a bit of a whinge, and did he have cold feet? And Luthen had to deliver that big speech to him in the lift, if you remember. But Lonnie very much, from what I've seen, Lonnie, he schmoozes with ISB officers in his spare time, not because he wants to be friends with them, but because he's trying to get information, I suppose, outside of the workplace. And he does do a lot for the rebellion, and he does do a lot for Luthen. We'll go to you first, Jason. What was your thoughts on, when Lonnie brings this information to Luthen, and obviously what's your thoughts on the outcome of Lonnie?
Yeah, obviously Lonnie, when we see him at this point, is desperate, and he can see that everything's crumbling around him. And obviously Luthen needs to get the information out of him. He needs to find out what information he's got. But I think Luthen goes into this meeting, and I think he knows that Lonnie's got the cold feet and needs to get out, whatever happens. But obviously, knowing that Deirdre has uncovered their identities, you know, I think Luthen's realised that Lonnie is a risk that he, if he was captured, he'd straight away give away the information. So obviously, Luthen's left at a point that he's got no other choice but to eliminate Lonnie. Very similar to the situation that Andor found himself in at the beginning of Rogue One. And throughout the last couple of days, I've sort of been rewatching stuff and rewatching Rogue One, and there's a lot of you suddenly realise how much Luthen is actually impacted on Cassian, and that's revealed later on in this arc. But this, for me, just goes to show that we're getting to the point that hard decisions are having to be made, and sadly, Lonnie is one of the ones that has to one of the hard decisions that we know Luthen can make because he's done it before. And yeah, it was. I think it was a fitting end to the character's arc, and that is the whole thing about this. I think I mentioned before that this this whole thing is wrapping everything up, and I think it's giving everyone, you know, where their story ends at this point of Andor, and Lonnie sadly wasn't going to make it to the end.
Yeah, I think one thing I think about Lonnie is that I don't think he knows what he's going to find when he goes into Deidre's personal files, right? And when he discovers that secret project, which is, of course, the Death Star. Not just the Death Star, but also the fact that the Emperor's entire energy program is like lies. So he's been lying to the galaxy. Like, he knows that, like, the Empire will not stop until this is covered up. So I think when he goes to Luton, it's because he knows he's found probably the biggest secret he could find, something he would never expect. And it is game over now. And then I think when Luton gets told about this, Luton realizes the same thing, like, you what? I wasn't expecting to hear this type of information. I need time to act. I need time to get the information off world. By killing Lonnie and leaving him on the bench, I think that leaves the ISB to scramble a bit. They don't know how he died. You know, it leaves more questions that they have to tie up, where if he took Lonnie in and went on the run, the Empire would be looking for Lonnie, if that makes sense. So I think Luthen knew he only had one thing to do, was to silence Lonnie, leave question marks above what's going on. Because they can't ask Lonnie what he knows, and they can't ask Lonnie who he's told when Lonnie is put down. And yeah, I think it leaves Luthen in a scramble to sort of, I'm going to tell Claire, I'm going to get this shop, and then I'm going to destroy that. Let's go to you, Kat. What was your thoughts on again, like, the information, Lonnie giving it to Luthen, and then obviously Luthen's action afterwards, and also what's your thoughts on when Deidre confronts Luthen? Luthen's very much, I'd say he's quite calm in the moment. I think he knows Claire has the information, and obviously he takes his own actions to sort of try and destroy himself. But just take us through your thoughts on that, Kat.
I think with Lonnie, he was pretty brave. I think that's one thing that definitely came through even in that moment, was he had completely betrayed the Empire. He had betrayed the ISB to get this information by going into Deidre's files and then trying to get it out to Luthen. And I did feel sorry for his character because Lonnie had so much to lose. He was always spoken about his family, always spoken about trying to get back to them. And he was hoping that Luthen could give him and his family a happy ending. And that sadly just couldn't pan out. I think Luthen at that moment, as you said, it's the timing is just all wrong. If they'd had more time, more preparation, he could have probably got Lonnie off world. But it's the paramount thing in this situation is getting this information to the rebellion. And it shows Luthen's loyalty to the rebel cause, that even if he and Mon Mothma have had different views on how the rebellion should be run, how things should come together, they share the point of view of the Empire must fall. So he knows that this information basically has to get to Bail Organa, it has to get to Mon Mothma, it has to get to somebody important, and that's why he entrusts it afterwards to Claire, because I think Claire was probably the only person Luthen trusted completely because of everything that had happened to them together. So by the time Dedra confronts him, I think Luthen has very much made peace with the fact that he's not getting out of this alive. Just like Lonnie couldn't, Luthen can't either. And he knows that by killing in a way it's a mercy killing, because Lonnie would otherwise have been tortured and executed by the ISB, and Luthen knows that's going to be his exact same fate if he lets himself fall into the hands of Dedra. So he takes actions to prevent that, to give himself an honourable and peaceful end. And really, Dedra should have seen that somebody as committed and so single-minded as Luthen wouldn't have given up easily. He was never going to be arrested easily, and I think it was her short-sightedness that basically led to Deidre's own downfall.
Definitely, I think for me, Deidre, she goes rushing in here, deploys her own tactical team, even though she's not running this operation anymore, as we know. And this is what gets her arrested, is the fact that she's gone in there, and then this man's ended up dead, and she's been looking at the secret files, and she's not a traitor, but because she's gone about things her own way, there's a smell there that she is a traitor, sadly, and because it's such a huge secret, they're not going to take any risks, which they don't, and we'll get to that. Moving on from that, we do get sort of a lovely bit of storytelling where we see Luthen and Claire and how they first meet, and Luthen's sort of defection from the Empire, and sort of raising Claire not just from a child to an adult, but also raising that in the ways of being careful around the galaxy and in ways of, fighting the Empire, I suppose. We'll stay with you, Kat, in this one. Just what was your thoughts on how these flashbacks were filmed, and what did it add to sort of this relationship, which I think, from my point of view, they're both very strong-willed people, Claire and Luthen, and we've seen them sort of not necessarily argue, but maybe sometimes there's an edge on both of them, but they are literally both working for the same goal, though. But just take us through your thoughts on that.
This storytelling just added everything to this episode. I think this is some of the best flashback sequencing I have ever seen in television, because up until this point, although Claire has been a very strong character, she's been essential to gaining information and tracking information for the rebellion and for Luthen, she's also been in the background. We haven't known why she helps Luthen. We haven't known her history. And in a single episode, just through setting up these flashbacks with the present moment and her actions in the present, we understand everything about Claire. We understand what she's been through, how she's been raised basically as a weapon by Luthen. And it just made me empathize and appreciate her character so much. And you appreciate her strength through all of this, because Claire watched her hometown destroyed as a child and then was raised by Luthen. But in a way, she's almost like Jyn Erso, because Claire and Jyn have both been raised by men who have been more partisans, guerrilla fighters. So they act much more on anger, they act much more on hatred rather than the hopefulness of the rebellion. And you do see that in Claire's actions against the Empire. She hates them with a passion she always has. And Luthen has only stoked that, although he has also tried to temper it at the same time so that she only takes actions when they are right to do so. And the way it was set up of how Claire basically has to kill her father figure by turning off his life support was so beautifully done. This dedication, again, Clea knows that if Luthen were to survive by some miracle, he would simply be tortured by the ISB. He would simply undergo pain and suffering. And she knows in that moment she can't let him do that, not just for the sake of the rebellion, but because she is this father figure to her. So she makes this choice and she sees it through, but all the way through the flashbacks, we understand why she's making the decision she does. And I think Clea might be my new favorite character.
She was absolutely awesome. Jason, just take us through your thoughts on this almost like Mission Impossible, Jason Bourne-esque sequence of Claire, infiltrating the hospital to, kill her friend Luthen, but not just kill him, but live on his wish. He would want to be dead so that he cannot be of use to the Empire, and just following through on this. And she needs to get herself out as well because she knows that she's the only one with the information that she has in her head. But just take us through your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this episode was truly amazing in my eyes because of the brilliant acting and the way it was done. Um, as you say, this whole idea of her infiltrating the hospital, which let's face it, is crawling with ISB. Everywhere you look, they're there, and she's managed to infiltrate and goes through um, sort of kidnapping this alien creature, which I saw a picture is actually one of the same alien creatures that we'd seen in the first season when Cassian's arrested. And I just loved the fact that it the whole episode is about, for me, Claire's journey and giving this character the chance to show how much she's been through. Up until this point, she's been a bit of a stiff sort of, doing very, this is what we've got to do, determined and everything. Now we've seen her, what really brought her to this point. And then obviously the fact that she's now going to have to basically kill the man that saved her and or has been bringing her up as his own almost. But that is the nature of what is going, what they've always been through since she met him. And obviously I think seeing the flashbacks has really built on, instead of Claire just being someone that works for Luthen, we understand their dynamic and how this is going to, how big an effect this is on her at this point. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I've been doing quite a lot of reading up on stuff since the series ended, and the actress that plays Claire, this was her first ever role since finishing like drama school, and if she doesn't go on to an Oscar-winning role at some point, I think she's got a very bright future, and this series really gave her time to shine. Um, I've seen an interview where she said, she got called in for the read through, and basically she was told, right, you're going to read with Stellan Skarsgård. And it was like, hey, all of a sudden, 1 minute I'm at drama school, then I'm working with this guy. And he, by all accounts, I think, took her under his wing as well. And I think that's what this whole relationship throughout the series has built on, is that Stellan's character, Luthen, took her under his wing and protected her, but also led her into a very dangerous arena. But let's face it, at the time of the Empire, it's dangerous for everyone because the Empire is only out for themselves. So I thought this, and the way that, you know, she dispatches the ISB, she is she's a killing machine that has been, created by Luthen since she was a child. Although I think we could see quite early on that she had natural survival instincts, which is why her and Luthen work so well.
No, definitely. I agree with everything there. And that pretty much this whole episode is sort of all about the information getting the Luthen and Claire, Deidre, pouncing on Luthen and getting herself arrested, and then of course Luthen's suicide attempt and Claire's infiltration of the hospital to, you know, do right by our friend and father figure Luthen and then get out with the information. Any final thoughts on this episode, Kat, before we move on?
I mean, it's just the way you summed it up then is the fact that everything in this episode is just Claire and Luthen and Deidre. And yet it felt so much longer than the 40 minutes. It felt like so much happened within that time. That is shocking to think that's all that happened, because there was so much story. It was just, the pacing of Andor has just been insanely good.
No, it certainly has been. Like I said, I think this episode filled a lot of gaps, even just little subtle things like, when we see childhood Claire and we see her in her backpack, and then when Claire goes back to the apartment on Coruscant and gets her backpack out, and then some of the gadgets she has in there is what she uses to actually infiltrate the hospital, which is just really, really cool. They had a sort of a get out plan there, and then they've had to execute it. Moving on from that episode, Who Else Knows is episode 11. Deidre is interrogated by Krennic, who very much admonishes her for allowing her data to be leaked and confronting Luthen alone. The investigation is assigned to Heard, who identifies Claire and partly goes to Claire as her public health concern to aid her arrest. In the safe house, Claire contacts Wilmon, who in turn recruits Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO to retrieve Luthen. Despite rebel leadership being fed up with their disobedience, Deidre gives Heard insight into Luthen's communications, and his team tracks Claire to the safe house, right after Cassian and Melshi enter to retrieve her. She reveals that the Empire is building a super weapon, but wishes to stay behind as the rebels on Yavin 4 deeply distrust Luthen's cell. As Heard's team closes in, K2SO enters the building and begins attacking Imperials. And that's probably not the best word. I would say absolutely demolishing Imperials. But yeah, let's go to you, Jason. What was your thoughts on sort of the communication between Claire and Wilmon, and sort of how good do you feel knowing that Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO were on the way to Coruscant?
Yeah, when obviously it goes through it, we've discussed in the previous episode how Wilmon is very much, he believes in what Luthen's doing. He's worked closely with Luthen and Claire, and obviously he's kept in contact, even though Mon Mothma and everyone doesn't complete. Well, not so much Mon Mothma, but the rest of the rebels don't really um, trust Luthen, because he's doing what's necessary to get the job done, and not necessarily towing the party line. Um, but the obviously once you see the, I think it's brilliant when we see Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO just sort of chilling and relaxing until they realise, okay, now's the time to pick everything up. And obviously, we knew that at this point they think they're going to retrieve Luthen. They don't know that he's dead. But obviously, they're on a mission, um, and as we're seeing throughout, the ISB are closing in on Claire. So it's going to be, it fits that these guys are heading in for what turns out to be a pretty impressive battle at the end of the episode. And obviously, Deirdre by this time has gone out of the equation. She's no longer a risk to Cassian. Um, so now we're heading towards the end game.
We are indeed. I think there's a beautiful piece of filmmaking here when we see Deidre sort of sitting in the interrogation room, awaiting. It's where she's been put and she's been arrested. When we see Krennic sort of strategically walk past and turn off any and all recording equipment, and then he goes in and he's very meticulous and terrifying in this moment. Almost the opposite of what we've seen him when he's dealing with Tarkin or Vader or the Emperor, but here he is the alpha dog. And he's very much, again, he knows this needs to be kept in the wraps because he's in the line here if this Death Star thing doesn't get sorted out. Kat, what was your thoughts on Ben Mendelsohn's Krennic and just how I don't know what it would be, he was just viper-like in this moment.
Menacing was the word that came to mind when this scene happened, because I love the cinematography of this. We have Deirdre sitting down and Krennic purposefully turning off the security cameras so that none of this gets on record. And you can see how uncomfortable that makes her, because initially she doesn't know who will walk into the room. I think she's probably wondering in that moment whether some kind of execution is just going to happen straight away. And then Krennic comes in, and Dedra only has to twist her head a little to see his cape, and she immediately knows who it is. And she never gets up, she never faces him. And I think that's what's so key in this moment, to really emphasize that she has lost any standing within the ISB, quite literally, because of the fact that she is sitting. If you remember the last time she and Krennic spoke about Gorman, they were standing, they were facing each other, they were sharing eye contact. Krennic saw Dedra, perhaps not as an equal, but certainly of equal standing. She was powerful in the ISB and well respected. But in this moment, she has lost all of that. She struck out on her own, and her obsession with access, her obsession with trying to find this rebel cell, while it might appear as dedication to her, to the Empire, it's a threat, because they don't like individuality, especially when it comes to the secrecy of the Death Star, Palpatine's ultimate weapon, and Krennic's dream project, basically. So this moment, I thought it was just written brilliantly to have Krennic be this menacing, because he is so angry about Dedra being reckless. And her recklessness has gotten her nowhere. Luthen is dead. The Empire don't know where this information is heading. And Krennic basically wipes his hands of her. She is of no use to the ISB now. And that fall from grace is just brilliantly done within only this little scene. And I think we all saw it coming. We all knew that Dedra, while she was a great villain, as Qui-Gon always said, there's always a bigger fish.
Definitely, 100%. And I think I'm glad he mentioned about how she sort of sabotages herself here. The way that she goes, she's obsessed with Axis, with Luthen, and goes after him here. And that tied in with the fact that she's been looking for documents she shouldn't have been, sort of sets her up for this downfall. But I would say it's very similar of the outcome of her partner. And I think Cyril very much, he becomes obsessed with Cassian to the point where, he gets killed fighting Cassian, and Cassian says, "Who is he? Like, who are you?" Cassian doesn't even know. And, leads to Cyril's death. And then here, she's got the access too hard. And, not so much her death, but her career and her existence as what she's proud of being is gone at this point. Jason, what are your thoughts on sort of the ISB here? You know, things move very quickly to sort of to Dedra being sort of locked up in jail to here sort of taking control. Part of Gaz is very much he doesn't say anything about Dedra, which is weird because he's sort of been her mentor, you could say, throughout Andor. But he very much starts giving Heert his ideas to help Heert achieve his goal. It looks like he sort of washed his hands of Dedra a little bit. So just what's your thoughts on the ISB and how fast it's been moving?
I think obviously one of the things that was quite interesting to me in the episodes early on when we first saw Krennic giving Partagaz and Deirdre the information about the Death Star project, and obviously recruiting them to do what they were supposed to do. My feeling from watching the episode where Partagaz basically told Deirdre, you've got no choice in this. You've got to do what Krennic's told you." And for me, that spelled out that Partagaz knew that um, they were no longer the top dogs in this. Up until this point, Partagaz and Deirdre were very much the top ISB that we saw. With Krennic's arrival, all of a sudden, they were a lot lower in the food chain. And I think, although obviously Partagaz, we see him heading all these meetings and everything, at this point, he realizes that Deirdre's took him to a place that he cannot control. And obviously, Hirt, we've seen, is a very different. He's just there to get the job done. He doesn't want to make friends. He doesn't want. He's just doing the job, which is what Krennic wants. Which is why he's given the job. He's also efficient. He's identified player. He's moving stuff along very quickly. But I did love the way Partagaz was the one that declared her as a public health concern. So that rather than branding her a rebel or anything like that, it was completely different. It was keeping her separate from the idea of any sort of rebellion. She was a risk to people, so they wouldn't get close to her, so they wouldn't give her the chance to pass on the information she had. That was where Partagaz shows how clever he is. And yet at the same time, in that meeting, for me, I could see that Partagaz realised that everything was falling apart. You know, Hirt was going off to do what he needed to do, but Partagaz, Deirdre had destroyed his career, and I think he'd realised that he put a lot of trust in her. You could see that there was a respect, and he saw her as someone who was rising up through the ranks, and all of a sudden that's come crashing down around the pair of them. Um, One thing I wanted to mention, because you've obviously touched on the Krennic scene, and I did read that the sequence where Krennic puts his finger on top of Deirdre's head was actually improvised by Ben Mendelsohn, and I think that just goes to show how brilliantly he's embodied this character, this really menacing character. Because when you watch the interviews, Ben Mendelsohn is one of the most loveliest guys that you could meet. And likewise, Denise Gough seems really a really nice person, and yet they both played these evil, calculating characters brilliantly. And Krennic, at this point as well, having now watched Rogue One, Krennic's starting to get okay. This is moving very quickly. I need to be in control of everything for this project to work, and that's shown in this scene. You know, he's taking back the control because there's a risk that the information that he's carefully kept secret to keep this project going is going to leak out.
Definitely. Something else that we see here is sort of when you talk about Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO, obviously, like in the previous arc, and we're a year removed from that now, you obviously saw Cassian dealing with the loss of Bix choosing to leave him. But it looks like Cassian surrounded himself by Melshi, who's a good friend. And obviously, looks like they've started to treat K2SO like a friend, and that's certainly helping his programming. As K2SO seems to have fallen in love with these guys, and we do see them sort of. I've seen it described as sort of a frat house, a fraternity type feel in Cassian's apartment when Melshi and K2SO are there. And we see some really cool stuff that's arc with them playing cards together and having a laugh. Obviously, as soon as Wilmon comes in and talks about the messages you see from Coruscant, they're very much serious then on board with stealing the U-wing and getting off ship. Kat, what were your thoughts on sort of this building family relationship between Cassian, Melshi, and K2? And obviously, like, what were your thoughts on the fact that they were going to get into trouble again when they had to steal the U-wing, and K2SO was very much letting them know that they're breaking orders again?
The return of K2 just makes my heart so happy because he does provide so much needed levity to this series. Andor and Rogue One are both very dark, very sad tales, and K2 is providing just that sprinkling of comedic humor just to make everything better, not just for us as the viewers, but also for his friends around him. And I think while Melshi and Cassian might complain about K2's antics, in reality, they probably really appreciate it because Cassian has gone so many times throughout this series. He's gone on saying that he's tired. He's tired of giving to the rebellion, of how much it's taking from him. But when he's having these moments with K2 and Melshi, that's put aside, and he can be in the present moment, taking things back, I suppose, into his life, taking back some of his happiness. But it also sort of makes it all the more tragic for Rogue One because we see the wonderful relationship Cassian had with so many of the rebels and with K2. So it's sort of it's a double-edged sword, really, seeing these extra scenes. But I did really enjoy sort of K2 gambling with them and trying to use his probabilities to figure out his best moves. But when it comes to taking the U-wing, I think it represents that while Cassian, Melshi, Wilman, while they've all dedicated themselves to the rebellion, they are also individuals who have very strong morals. Cassian is still extremely loyal to Luthen because he's the one who brought him into the rebellion. He's the one that inspired him to fight back against the Empire. And it's something that Cassian himself is inspiring in others. So I feel it's almost like the power of friendship being portrayed in this moment. Even though it could be argued, does Cassian see Luthen as a friend? I would say that deep down he does, in a certain way. It might not be in a clear-cut, normal way, but there is this element of friendship. And friends don't leave each other behind. So as soon as that rescue call goes out, Cassian knows that it is his moral duty, it's his duty as a friend to go and help, no matter what K2 thinks about it.
Yeah, and it's not just friendship. I think it's just Cassian's well aware of what Luthen's given to the rebellion, and yeah, like for the rebellion to be legitimate, it needs to be what Yavin is going to become, and it needs more Mothman in its leadership and Bail Organa. It needs to be built in that way, but you couldn't have that without sort of the stuff that Luthen was doing for decades. And I think Cassian understands that as well. Cassian chose I'm going to join this rebellion side, the official side of it, but that doesn't mean I don't respect and understand what came before. And Luthen gave everything, and he knows that, and risked everything, and he knows that. Luthen risked himself to save Cassian in season 1. Luthen's risked himself, for Mon Mothma. And it's good to see that sort of game accepts game, I suppose you could say. In the very much he's there for him in this time of need, and he knows that for him to have message from Coruscant, Cassian knows it must be something it must be the end game, which is what it is. It's information that is the end game, and that's why they need to go. On Coruscant, obviously, we do see Deidre sort of accept her position, I suppose, and she does give Hate some information which helps them locate the building that Claire is hiding in. Jason, what was your thoughts on Deidre sort of realizing that she's probably done here and helping the ISB a little bit? And also, what was your thoughts on just how tense and how awesome this whole sequence was with the U-Wing arriving and then the ISB arriving and then the whole shenanigans in the apartment block and then K2SO obviously coming to save the day?
Yeah, obviously, with Deirdre, you can see time's up. I think it's sort of desperation that maybe if she still continues to help them, it won't end quite so badly for her. And I think the thing is, Deirdre has been dedicated to the Empire no matter what. So, I think there's still a sense of loyalty to the Empire, even through what she's seen. She's still loyal to the cause. Um, and then, obviously, you know, we've got this. It's obvious Cassian's on his way, the U Wing's on its way, but we're also seeing that they're heading towards, to all intents and purposes, a trap that, they're going to be um, met, or the ISB are going to be very close behind them. So obviously, then we see the preparation, the ISB coming in just after the U Wing's gone in, um, and you think, okay, they're trapped in that building, and the ISB are coming in. And I have to admit, obviously, we've seen from the trailers and that K2SO was going to have a bit of a chance to throw around a few Imperials. So there was sort of the spoiler was there. We knew who was going to rescue Cassian and Melshi and Claire, and Wilmon. And so there we go. You're going in. K2SO's there, and the ISB are going in all prepared and all ready for what they think that is going to be quite an easy arrest. And the reality is, no, K2SO is going to take them down. And I think, the lead up to this, when he goes across the bridge and just starts throwing around the first of the ISB guys, it's just brilliant. And, it was like, yes, here's K2SO. This is the K2SO we know and love from Rogue One. And he's back in action.
Kat, your thoughts on sort of this suspenseful but awesome action end of the episode?
Oh, K2, he is a machine. I mean, I know he is a machine because he is a droid, but he is also a machine. As soon as he realizes the comms have been scrambled, he goes into action mode. And because the Rebel Alliance was so clever in that when they reprogrammed him and woke him back up, they never changed his livery. He's not been repainted, he's not had any custom modifications, so he still looks just like a normal KX droid. And that throws the ISB. They don't realize that this isn't one of their KX droids. And it just gives K2 the perfect cover to storm through them. But I think it was also in this moment that you can see the desperation of the ISB and how they have lost all control because there's no backup. Pendergast is asking for backup, but it's all been assigned elsewhere. And it was hilarious because in the ISB headquarters, they're told to wait, please hold, and you can see on everyone's faces in that room, they know this is going badly wrong. But K2 is then crushing through these Imperials. And when he grabs Hurt, I couldn't believe the fact that the captain just shot through him. Because I'm not convinced K2 actually killed Hurt. I think he was like using him almost as a shield to stop people shooting at him because, hello, I'm carrying the leading officer here. But no, the captain shoots straight through his armor to try and destroy K2, which doesn't really make any sense because we know that KX droids are literally almost everything proof. And I do love the way then he comes into the entrance and he's all so proud of himself and says to Cassian, "I have cleared a path." And it's again, it's K2 bringing us down from this intense, adrenaline-filled, dark sequence. It brings that levity back of, yeah, K2 saved the day. Let's get out of here. And again, it's just solidifying my love for this droid, and I want him as my sidekick in real life.
Indeed. And this is very much the beginning of episode 12, which is titled Jedha, Kyber, Erso. K2SO kills Hyd and his team, but Claire is gravely wounded. Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO take her back to Yavin 4, where they are grounded by Bail for their disobedience. Much of the rebel leadership, including Bail, do not trust Luthen's intel, but Mon Mothma is willing enough to hear Claire out. Vel talks with Cassian, who convinces her of Luthen's integrity, and they toast their fallen comrades. Portagaz commits suicide upon realizing he is to be arrested, while a weeping Deidre is imprisoned on a prison facility very similar to Narkina 5. As a rebel informant associated with Saw contacts Yavin 4 begging to talk with Cassian, the rebel leadership realizes that the evidence is too great to be a trap and agrees to let Cassian and K2SO fly to the Ring of Catherine to meet with the informant. Claire accepts her role on Yavin 4 with Wilmon, Mon, and Vel. On Minor Rao, B2MO plays with another droid, while Bix cradles a baby as she looks wistfully towards the horizon. A lot to unpack in this one. Let's start where you just finished off, Kat. I think, it kicks off at sort of the end of that scene in the apartment block. K2SO kills Hyd and his team. So from my point of view, I've only watched it once. I think he injures Hyd pretty badly, and then he uses them as a human shield. These ISB weapons, I think, are probably more powerful than Standard Blasters. But I've also noticed that when ISB was shooting at K2SO, I thought K2SO was potentially moving Hyd's body slightly as well, like to hit the blasts, to sort of give him that. But yeah, it was pretty vicious. And it does go to show that these ISB don't really have much respect for these officers who don't really see much action, I suppose. But yeah, that's what you, Kat. Obviously, what was your thoughts on the return to Yavin? I suppose Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO get back to Yavin 4 with Claire in one piece, luckily, and the information, and obviously the Rebel Alliance are, to me, are being a bit silly here, and just a little bit silly.
Yeah, I agree that the Rebel Alliance's reluctance to accept this information did seem odd because Cassian has just risked his life, Melshi's life, K2, to save Claire for this information. And he knows that neither Claire nor Luthen would have sent this call out from Coruscant unless the situation was that important. Secrecy and paranoia to them was what kept them safe. And the fact that all of that went out the window as soon as they received this information proves to Cassian its authenticity. But then the rebel leaders are, very reluctant. And even Bail, who is usually the voice of reason and action, is questioning the authenticity and validity of the information Cassian brings them. So I empathized with Cassian's anger towards them, that they are, in a way, almost disrespecting Luthen's sacrifice, because Luthen is dead, that he died for this information. He died to get it out to the Rebel Alliance. And they are too suspicious of it. Except for Mon Mothma, because she knows Luthen, and much like Cassian, she knows how much Luthen has sacrificed for their cause. So I think there's definitely a split between the leadership of those who want to be very cautious and are questioning what the ISB would let slip, and those like Mon Mothma who perhaps understand that the Empire, and especially Palpatine, they have fewer limits than maybe the public realize. Because if there's one thing that becomes quite noticeable during that conversation, is that the energy project was well known. This was public knowledge that the Empire was having funded through the Senate. So the Death Star was being funded through the Senate. So all of that information, although falsified, must have looked so real to fool all of the senators, including Mon Mothma at some point, that to then question it all is a massive deal. To realize you've been lied to for over a decade, because we know that's how long Krennic has been working on it, it must come as a shock to them. And I think it takes time for that kind of revelation to sink in before you can be rational about it and realize, yes, it's a lie, now we need to act. But the hostility is certainly not what you expect from the rebels.
Yeah, obviously we have Jonathan Ayres and Sharon Duncan Brewster reprised their Rogue One roles as Senator Nawa Jebel and Senator Tanra Pamlo. I remember in Rogue One they were just little whiny bitches as they are here. Like, whoa, as if we've joined the rebellion but we don't want to actually do anything. We just want to like hide in Yavin and have a good time. And again, they came across exactly like that. And it was good to see sort of Mon having to put our foot down and be like, well, actually, no, like we need to consider this because yeah, the one thing Luthen's not is a traitor. One thing he hates is the Empire. So whatever this is, it is definitely anti-imperial and to help us. And again, you wouldn't be sitting in this base right now if it wasn't for the things that Luthen and his cell had done throughout previous years. And I think with Bale as well, you remember, if Luthen hadn't done what he'd done, Bale's team, who were going to get Mon Mothma off of Coruscant, were compromised. So, I think it says a lot there as well. Jason, we'll go over to you. What's your thoughts on the return to Yavin 4 and the mix of strong rebels and whiny bitch senators?
Yeah, this was done brilliantly because it did tie straight into what we'd seen previously at Rogue One. The like we've seen with the Imperials, where there's some that are not as committed to everything. You've got the same here with the rebels. They're rebels, but at the same point, they don't want to take the risks. I don't think they fully appreciate the true danger that they're in, and this is what Cassian points out. Luthen saw what the from a first-hand experience, and he did more than anyone. And although people didn't like what he did, they can't take away from the fact that his reasoning for doing it was for the greater good. And I think we saw with Luthen as he further went on that you know he didn't he was doing what he needed to do for a means to an end, but he didn't necessarily enjoy doing it. But he knew it was the only way he could bring down the Empire. Um, so obviously, there was always going to be, like we'd seen, for the senators to be at the point that they were in at Rogue One, they had to be at the same or a similar point at the point that we see them. Obviously, the one that did surprise me, like you say, is Bail Organa. Um, but at the same time, I think maybe he's not, uh, he's still grasping what's going on, the true extent of everything that's happening there. But I think this whole episode again, just goes to show that the rebels were united and yet divided at the same time. And let's face it, these senators, they hadn't seen the true atrocities that everyone else had because they were protected by their office. So it's only natural that they're not going to stand up. Mon Mothma has seen a bit more than everyone else, and obviously we know, we've seen her escape and everything. So we know that she's in a slightly different mindset to these other senators that maybe have just run the Yavin in the hope that they'll keep out of the Empire's hair. So I thought this was really, really good. It showed Cassian. It showed us how Cassian got to the point that we see him in Rogue One, which I think was vital for this part of the series. And it was, it just really did re-emphasize where the character was at. And obviously seeing him basically, I liked the fact that Mon Mothma did jump to his defense in the final part when obviously they grounded him and he'd asked to be able to go and see Claire. And before any of them had chance, that's when Mon Mothma stood up as the leader and said, "Granted, go." And I thought that showed the strength of the character. So, yeah, I think these scenes back at Yavin were vital to see where the characters were at this point.
Moving on from the rebel side of it, obviously the ISB side, as I mentioned, we see sort of Jedha imprisoned on almost the women's version of Nokina 5, and Portagaz, decides to take his own life. Kat, just take us through your thoughts on on how the Empire are dealing with what's gone on.
Well, I mean, the Empire are trying to do damage control because at this point, Krennic realizes that Claire is gone and the information is out there with potentially who knows how many other people. So the ISB are basically at the highest alert possible. And this is if this is taken to Krennic, this is obviously going to reach the highest level of Imperial command. Tarkin is going to know about this. The Emperor could potentially know about this because this is the Death Star we're talking about. And I think the this is kind of the fall of the ISB, and maybe also why the Imperial Navy are then given so much control. Because in Rogue One, we see Tarkin come onto the Death Star, and we see him taking it from Krennic, and I think that could be because of what happened here, in the sense that the ISB were given so much power, they were given so much control. Krennic was one of their leaders, and everything went wrong. They were the source of the leak, and they let the source escape. So by the time Rogue One comes around, I think the ISB will have lost a lot of favor with the Empire and with the Emperor. So the Imperial Navy can then take much more control of the Death Star. But I honestly wasn't surprised about Pendergast, because if you remember the comic, I think it is just called Lando. He steals one of the Emperor's ships, and it was being guarded by a Star Destroyer. And when Lando does get away with the robbery, the captain of that Star Destroyer just takes his blaster to his head because he doesn't want to face the repercussions, because there's no such thing as just a quiet reprimand in the Empire. So Pendergast decides to take the quieter, more peaceful way out, which is to go on his own terms. And I guess it does show the ruthlessness of the Empire towards its own, because while you're in favor and you're doing well within the Empire, you can go so far. You have everything that you could possibly imagine. But as soon as you step out of line or make a mistake, that's fatal. And that fatality is just really everything we've seen in these 3 episodes, these 3 final episodes within the ISB has just been showing the fatality of everyone's actions and their consequences.
Definitely. One thing I did appreciate was when Portagaz asks for a few moments to gather his thoughts, it's another senior officer who allows him to have that time and leaves the room. And I think the other senior officer knows what Portagaz is going to do, and gives him that opportunity to sort of go out on his own terms. And when the shot gets fired, the troops sort of raise the blasters to react, and the senior officer sort of just puts his hand to say, don't worry about it. He's just ended his life, and almost as a respectful type of thing. I think some things that I found funny in this episode in a good way was obviously again those 2 senators who I thought were whiny rebel bitches, but then also Saw Gerrera makes an appearance again, and he's very much speaking to the rebellion from. I've absolutely forgotten the name of the planet. From what's it called? The moon where the Kyber is, Jedha. And I like how Saw Gerrera doubles down, saying, "You don't know where I am." And it's like, we're doing where you are, but he was almost. I don't mean this is a bad way, but he acts like a child here. He's like, I'm just going to double down and tell you where I'm not there, and you just have to accept that. But what were your thoughts on Saw Gerrera in this last time we see him before Rogue One, Jason?
Yeah, this to me again, rewatching a load of stuff as I have been this weekend. It shows to me the point that Saw Gerrera and his relationship with the rebellion, and in particular Mon Mothma, is. It's very much he's out on his own. He doesn't want a part of. He's gonna do it his way, which is why he's like, no, I'm not there. That you don't know where I am. You don't know what I'm doing. I'm flying solo, and yeah, I thought this was done brilliantly. Seeing Saw Gerrera at this point really emphasised the Saw Gerrera that we meet at the beginning of Rogue One, or during Rogue One, and obviously his demise in Rogue One is partly because he's doing it his way. He's not doing it the same way as the rest of them. So I like the fact that they put this into this episode. Saw Gerrera's big part of the story of Rogue One, but also was a big part in the lead up to the story of Rogue One.
Yeah, I think it very much shows Saw's very much like that Saw who's fully lost his mind now. I think where when we see him in Rogue One, he's ball gullet, knows the truth, and he's willing to put people through hell. And would he get information or he not? I don't think he really cares. He's just sort of on a one man mission to just make everyone else feel as bad as he does and as messed up as he does. I think. Before we get into the sort of the very last scene involving Bix, before that this episode sort of gears things up to Rogue One very nicely. We have sort of someone's reached out to the rebellion, wants to speak to Cassian. It's in regards to Galen Erso, Kyber and Jedha, which sort of matches the information that they received from Claire and Luthen. What were your thoughts, Kat, on just sort of how this sort of wrapped up nicely everything that's been going on into the events of Rogue One, and how we're going to have, obviously when Rogue One starts, we see Cassian on the Ring of Catherine meeting that person who has information. Just your thoughts on that wrap-up job there.
Oh, I thought this wrap-up was absolutely incredible. As the music soars, we get some of the Rogue One theme intermixed into it, and we see Cassian striding with purpose. towards his U-wing with the mission to go to the Ring of Gafreen. And I think in this moment you see his complete dedication to the rebellion. There really isn't any way back out now. And there's flashes to everybody he served beside and who he's lost, because at one just before he goes, obviously he has that dream about his sister who is still on his mind. And I thought it was just amazingly done, because now it makes sense. Not that Rogue One didn't make sense, but now we have all the context for the Ring of Kafrene and why it was so important for Cassian to get this information. So important that he had to kill his informant. Now we understand that. Now we see the stakes, because people have already died just to try and get some of this information out. So it's clearly something the Empire are trying to hide. And this mission, it's so much more important than it seems, just by saying, oh, it's an informant you need to meet. No, this is the informant. This is the informant that will lead to everything. So I thought it was just brilliantly done. I loved seeing some of like the everyday moments in the rebellion as well, of them training, fixing the X-wings, and we have this lovely little scene of Mon Mothma sitting down in very sort of humble clothes, eating at the mess hall with the troops. And I thought that was a really lovely moment, because it shows how connected Mon Mothma is with the rebellion. She isn't just a leader who is above them, who sees them as below her. She is there with them. And I thought just in that one little scene, it really encapsulated her character, of how she sees the importance of the people within the rebellion. While we also get that glimpse of Perrin doing goodness knows what on Coruscant. I don't even want to know what was going on there. But no, I thought this final montage of all the different characters that we have been introduced to or have reconnected with throughout Andor was just, I couldn't actually think of a more perfect way to finish off and sum up this entire series.
Yeah, I thought it was done really well. It ties us into Rogue One very nicely, which is, of course, what we were promised when the series was announced, and it certainly did deliver. I love the fact that when you see what they've had to go through to get to this point, it almost makes you understand why Cassian was maybe prepared to follow Draven's orders and kill Galen Erso. Obviously, they didn't realise Galen's importance and if he was good or bad and that type of thing. And it doesn't mean I sort of agree with him on it, but I can understand why he was. He put that rifle in his attack configuration and went up on that hill to do that. Jason, your thoughts on how this sort of ties in the rebellion and the Empire heading into Rogue One?
Yeah, for me, I love this final bit on Yavin, where we see everyone sort of gets a little tying up done. So you see all the different characters that are still alive being tied, their stories being nicely tied up. And as Kat said, it's lovely to see like the Mon Mothma sat at the table. That showed then the sort of leader that she is, and I think that was needed to create more of the character that she's progressed from being a senator to someone. All of her wealth and trappings that we've seen throughout a series are gone. And I saw that someone had said, why did we need so much about Mon Mothma's, rich lifestyle and that? And I think that is shown in this scene, that we've seen her journey and we've been on that journey with her. So no, to me, it made perfect sense that all of that was Tony Gilroy telling the story of how Mon Mothma went from senator to rebel leader. And Cassian, the walk through where Cassian's walking to the U-wing, and we all know where it's all going, and it's done so brilliantly. The cinematic vision that's there. And I know there's stories that they're going to do screenings with it all together with Rogue One, and it just leads into it perfectly. And the scene with Perrin, that sort of, I'm glad they put in something so we know. It looks like he's back on Coruscant, just basically drinking and living the life because Mon's gone, and he's got no other purpose now. He's got nothing. Whatever he was, that's all he is now. I did read that there was a scene that was in the script that never made it, where Mon and Perrin actually speak after a later stage, basically when she's about to go and everything. And he basically said, I was taken in by the ISB every week, and they asked me to spy on you, and I didn't. I knew what you were doing, but I didn't. And I sort of think, yeah, I'm quite glad he didn't get a redemption, and that he was just this this he represented what was bad in the galaxy at that point, the rich, the ones that were just letting the Empire get away with what they were doing. um So I'm glad he didn't get a redemption, because I think there needed to be characters like that still in the story. But overall, bringing it all through, and then that final shot that I'm sure we're going to discuss. I'm just so glad that we got to see that B2 was still okay.
Yeah, I didn't think Perrin looked happy. To be fair, and I think two things. I think we never throughout this entire series, season 1 and 2, we never see Mon share any information with Perrin. So that's because she doesn't trust him, or what, we don't know, right? But she chooses not to do that. So that in itself would drive a wedge between them, right? Because she's keeping secrets from him.
Yep.
So, and I'm not saying he's a good guy here, because he's obviously depicted as maybe as not being a good guy, and maybe there's reasons why she doesn't 100% trust him. But I don't think he necessarily gets a choice to go with Mon. Like, Mon doesn't say, you get off the planet now because I'm going to be leaving after this speech, type of thing. That doesn't happen. So he gets left behind, and it's almost like, because he's left behind and Mon's gone the way she's gone, he can't then all of a sudden say, oh, well, like, yeah, like, I trust my wife and love her because, like, she's now an enemy of the Empire. So I think he looks sad, lonely. Even though he's with a woman there, he looks sad, lonely. He's drinking his life away, almost, because that's all there is left to do. Do you know what your thoughts were on that scene of Perrin? And it was almost like what was left behind by Mon, if that makes sense.
No, I totally agree, because if you actually look at Perrin, if you look at his costume, this is the first time we've ever seen him disheveled. Perrin was always someone who took pride in his appearance, and his costuming has always been very elegant, everything perfectly in place. But in that speeder, he is completely disheveled, and he is still drunk. And that isn't just any woman, that is Skolden's wife, I'm pretty sure. So, like I said, I don't know what's going on there, but he has lost everything. And I don't know how it would affect Perrin, in the sense that he's been kept in the dark, and Mon Mothma is an enemy of the Empire. Because would the ISB drag him in for questioning as her husband, or would he simply denounce her straight away? I'm not sure, but Perrin has just been. I mean, we've never liked his character from season 1, because he is just obsessed with, as long as he's living a happy life, no one else matters. So maybe in this moment he's starting to realize that his life was never actually happy, and he just thought it was. And now that illusion has been ripped away. So he's drinking to put himself back into that illusion.
Quite possibly. I also wonder if, I think Mon realizes that once she goes, obviously her family are sort of fresh meat for the Empire. So, her daughter, who doesn't leave him on either, could be at risk. So I suppose leaving Perrin there to sort of maybe look after the daughter, and as long as those guys, say, look, we didn't know what Mom was doing, and also, like, we don't like her anymore, then we're safe. But it could also be just keep her daughter safe as well, I suppose. Our final scene on Mina Rouse, we're back there on the farming planet. We see B2MO, which is fantastic. We haven't seen him since the first arc, and he is very much playing with an android. And then in very much George Lucas-esque Star Wars, we see Bix looking towards the horizon with a child, who I'm going to assume is Cassian's child, looking wistfully towards the horizon. And again, just adds more to the tragedy. She's told in a video to Cassian in the last arc, she said, when this is all done, we'll find each other, I'll find you, but this child's going to not have a father within the next couple of days. Let's stay with you, Catus. What was your thoughts on this final scene, and on, we do get to see what happens to B2MO and Bix?
I mean, Rogue One was already a sad movie, but Tony Gilroy really just said, hold my beer, let me make it even sadder. Now that you know Cassian had a child who he's never going to meet. I am never going to be able to watch Rogue One now without sobbing at that ending. I already cried at the ending, but now I will just be inconsolable, because while this is a beautiful and wholesome scene of Bix having the family she's always wanted, it is also just reinforcing that Cassian sacrificed everything for the rebellion, everything for a better galaxy. That his child will grow up appreciating, but his child will also grow up never knowing their father. And I think that is such a tragedy. It is so bittersweet. This moment, everything about this moment is bittersweet, because we see B2MO playing and having fun. He's never going to see Cassian again. He's always going to be waiting for Cassian, and Cassian is never going to come home. And Bix is never going to see him again. And their child is never going to meet their father. So it is just this very bittersweet moment. Even though it's framed beautifully, all these warm tones, this lovely landscape of Mina Rao, Bix looking happy and healthy, it's still, behind all of that is just the sadness and the tragedy. But I also think it does help to explain maybe one of the other reasons she left the rebellion is she realized she was pregnant, and that would completely distract Cassian. At that point, Cassian would probably have left the rebellion entirely and gone with her to Mina Rao. And he would have lived a happy life with her. But she knew that he was destined for greater things. And that destiny was the ultimate sacrifice for the peace and future of the galaxy. So, so beautifully tragic, as Star Wars really seems to be embodying forever.
Indeed, Star Wars is tragedy. Jace, your thoughts on, we get to see what happens to B2MO and Bix?
Yeah, it was the one thing that we all wanted to know, what had happened to Bix. And the fact that, as Kat rightly said, I think she left to protect the unborn child, and obviously she's never going to see Cassian, which is the one tragedy that we know to be a fact. And I think the whole ending, as you said, it's sort of added more tragedy to an already tragic film with Rogue One. At the end, all of the good guys die, which was something at the time everyone said that doesn't normally happen. The good guys normally come through. So I think seeing Bix's happy ending makes Cassian's even more tragic. And I think it was brilliantly, rightly, as Kat said, everything was bright, sunshiny, she's there cradling the baby, and it was just there to tear everyone's heart out, and it was done brilliantly, and it was the perfect ending to, I think, a brilliant series.
No, definitely. And I would love to think that down the line, if Bix ever sort of encounters Mon Mothma, then their child, Mon can tell stories of how brave Cassian was, and Cassian's child will learn that about him. One of my favorite things in this whole arc, I think, was when Deidre confronts Luthen. She's very much like, "We've got you," and he sort of says, "The rebellion isn't here anymore. The rebellion flew away. It's everywhere. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to discuss you." And it's very much a case of like, yeah, you're too late. You've caught Luthen after Luthen's already found probably the most vital bit of information he's ever going to find and passed it on. So you've caught him when it's too late. I think he's a piece of that, which is why he does what he does, because he knows I kill myself here, and the information gets to the rebellion, and then game over for you guys, Empire. Also, it does take maybe a decade more, but it does set those moments into those events in motion. I think one thing that is cool is that we see just how integral sort of everything Luthen and what we've seen in season 1 and then season 2 is to the rebellion, and to destroying this Death Star, and then again leading to what happens in Return of the Jedi, and it's very important. Jason, is there any last thoughts about anything Cassian Andor you want to talk about?
You've just mentioned obviously the scene where Did Romero goes into the uh, what antique shop, so to speak. I've seen it all day, and I've got to ask: did anyone else spot the head of the Gungan? And was that Tony Gilroy's put in some amazing little Easter eggs all the way through this series? Was that really the head of the Gungan in there? But this series, I think, has gripped everyone. I've seen it. It's been lovely to actually see a series mostly met with positivity from the community, because it is different to what we'd expect of Star Wars, but there's many different aspects to a war, and this shows the spy game, the backs the backstage, so to think, of the war stage. It's not just everyone shooting people with guns. There's planning. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and that's what this series was showing. And I think it did it brilliantly. And yeah, I think Tony Gilroy. And it was interesting to see in the interview where he said that he had, for all the criticism that Kathleen Kennedy gets, she's the one that in the long run has said, let's go with this series, let's run this story. And it's a brilliant story, and it's been done brilliantly with a lot of very skilled and talented people who really do deserve credit where credit's due.
Yes, they certainly do. Everybody involved deserves a lot of credit. One thing I want to touch on before, I think probably my final thought on this was obviously Deidre's ending, imprisoned in the prison facility, similar to Nokia 5. That'll probably a lifetime in jail, I imagine, because they wouldn't want to get out with the things that she knows. I think as we saw with Portagaz, I think death is probably the choice she would rather have. But the ISB of the Empire have locked her up forever, and I think that's probably worse than death for Deidre, and that's good because I think while we can have sympathetic villains, it's not a new concept. Deidre was a rotten person to her core. I think she was an individual who seeked to thrive in a fascist regime. She was a fascist herself, and here she gets her just desserts. Is what I would say to that. Kat, any closing thoughts on anything Cassian Andor?
I think that this series has just shown that Star Wars is always about politics, even though a lot of the films and a lot of the other series have focused on the action adventure, the mythic lore, the beauty within the galaxy. At its heart, there is so much political machinations and the political theatres of war, particularly around this time with the Empire. And the way that Andor and Tony Gilroy has been inspired by history, by real life events, and has woven it into this intergalactic saga is just mind blowing. And in an interview with Stellan Skarsgård, he said, "History never goes out of date," and that is what Andor feels like. It feels like you could watch this at any point and still find it relevant, and still find the themes so important to see included within storytelling. And I think it's very thought provoking. Andor might be about a different galaxy, but it is still extremely thought provoking, and just it's added so much richness to the political drama in the background of Star Wars. We get we get it in the books, we get it in the comics, we see little snippets of it in the films, but these series have just devoted themselves to showing the political playground that uh, leads to A New Hope and the ultimate destruction of the Empire in Return of the Jedi. And I just think that Andor now has cemented itself as just integral to the Star Wars universe. This is a series you, I think, have to watch because Rogue One and Andor set up the original trilogy. Yes, they've been made years later, but they now set up all of that. And I think that is some extremely powerful storytelling.
Yeah, we've almost got a new Star Wars trilogy, so that connects the prequels to the original, right? Because I think there's two ways you can look at it, but I think you can look at it as Andor season 1 being part 1, Andor season 2 being part 2, then Rogue One being part 3 of a trilogy, or you can look at it as Andor 1 and 2 is part 1, Rogue One is part 2, and then A New Hope is part 3. But we've almost now got a trilogy that fits very nicely together in between two trilogies, which is really cool. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, definitely. And I think by sort of encapsulating it as a trilogy of Andor season one, Andor season two, and Rogue One, if you do view that as the trilogy, I think that again just shows the integrity now of this part of the timeline of the canon to the original trilogy, because each story that Andor has portrayed in both seasons and Rogue One has focused on not just the character development, not just the politics, but on the mission of the rebellion. We now understand why it was formed, how it was formed, and how it goes from these individual cells, individual freedom fighters, to a rebellion that is built on hope. And I think that is just, yeah, it's just amazing. And I definitely think watching season one, season two, and then Rogue One will completely hit differently if you just binge watch them all.
I think so, definitely. And here we are in May 2025. The Andor storyline comes to an end. Just think, I think Rogue One was released in 2016. I think it was in November 2017 that Bob Iger announced that Disney and Lucasfilm were developing live action Star Wars TV series. I think it was 1 year later, it was revealed that one of the shows would be a prequel to Rogue One. So from 2017 and sort of the mini announcement of TV shows, 2018 if you count when they said it would be a prequel to Rogue One, it's 7 or 8 years we've been on this journey, and then it finally comes to an end. And I think that's my final thoughts on it. And you also think about it was only in April of 2020, I think, when Gilroy came on as official showrunner. I think there'd been some showrunners before, and the show had sort of moved a little bit in that time frame. The show was also produced through the pandemic. It was pre-production had begun before the pandemic, I think, and then the pandemic hit. So it has been a wild ride for the Andor storytelling. Jason, any closing thoughts on anything Andor, Star Wars, and where can the people find you on social media?
Yeah, no, just go back, rewatch it all, enjoy it. For me, it's bigger than a trilogy. I think it's more of a saga, and it's been an amazing journey. Done with class, and I'm looking forward to much more Star Wars coming our way. And as always, it's at Hondo Ling.
Kat, any closing thoughts on anything Andor or anything Star Wars, and where can people find you on the socials?
Just that Tony Gilroy and all the amazing writers who have worked on Andor know how to rip our hearts out. And you can find me at Cat Kylo on Twitter, where I'm always happy to talk anything Star Wars, Lego, or Kylo Ren.
And you can find myself on X, formerly known as Twitter, and on Instagram at Geordie Jedi Pete. You can also find the podcast on X at Boz Star. And you can find the podcast on all other socials, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, everywhere else at Star Wars Podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave us a 5-star review, a lovely little sentence. It does help people find the show, and it keeps us smiling all week. And if you are listening on any of the other wonderful podcast applications out there is a lot of them now, and it has a feature to leave a review. Leave us a top review, as many stars as you can. A lovely sentence again. Keeps us smiling all week. Only takes you a few moments, and it does help people find the show. We also now have Patreon. If you want some extra content and want to support the show, check that out. The link is in the notes in the description of this episode. May the Force be with you all, and remember, always tell that to Kanja Club.